Death has a way of revealing people's true colors. I learned this when my father died on a Tuesday afternoon, and my mother-in-law chose that moment to show exactly who she was. I was sitting in the hospital corridor, my phone buzzing with a text that would change everything. "Sorry to hear about your father, but we won't be attending the funeral. He wasn't really family anyway. Focus on moving past this quickly. Brenda Johnson, always efficient with her cruelty." Hello there. Before we dive into today's story, give us a virtual wave from your location. Drop it in the comments, and if you're new, become part of our story-loving family. My name is Camille, and until that moment, I'd spent 5 years trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law. Perfect wife. Perfect everything. The screen blurred as I read the message again, my hands shaking. What did Mom say? Mark appeared beside me, coffee in hand. His presence, once comforting, now felt like sandpaper against my raw nerves. "Read it yourself." I thrust the phone at him, watching his face. He barely flinched. "She doesn't mean it like that," he said, handing the phone back. "You know how direct she can be." Direct. That's what we always called it. Direct when she criticized my career choices. Direct when she took over our wedding planning. Direct when she told me I wasn't good enough for her precious son. "My father just died, Mark." My voice came out steady, surprising even me. "He was the man who walked me down the aisle at our wedding. Who helped us move into our first house. Who treated you like his own son." Mark shifted his weight, that familiar uncomfortable look crossing his face. The same look he got whenever he had to choose between me and his mother. "Maybe we should focus on the arrangements instead of." Instead of what? Instead of acknowledging that your mother is a heartless bitch. An elderly nurse shot us a disapproving look. Mark's face reddened. "You're upset. I get it. But let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." That's when I saw it, the text notification on his phone. From Megan, his sister, "Mom's right. Don't let her guilt you into this." They'd been discussing this. Planning this. While my father lay dying, they'd been strategizing how to minimize their involvement in my grief. I stood up, my legs steadier than they had any right to be. "Go home, Mark. Camille. Go home to your mother. That's where you'd rather be anyway." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Through the hospital window, I could see the sun setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. My father would never see another sunset. And I would never see my in-laws the same way again. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But they can be avenged. The funeral home smelled like artificial flowers and regret. I sat in the front row, staring at the mahogany casket that held my father, while Mark's empty chair beside me screamed louder than any words could. "Everything looks beautiful," my mother whispered, squeezing my hand. Her strength amazed me, how she could still stand straight while her world collapsed. The memory hit me like a slap, my wedding day, 5 years ago. Brenda Johnson storming into the bridal suite, declaring my chosen flowers common and my dress inadequate. She'd replaced everything. Down to the table settings, while Mark stood by with that helpless smile. "Your father would have loved this service," Mom said, pulling me back to the present. Simple. Dignified. Just like him. The door creaked open. I turned, expecting, hoping, to see Mark. Instead, Megan slipped in, wearing a red dress that belonged more at a cocktail party than a funeral. She caught my eye and lifted her chin, a challenge in her stance. "What is she doing here?" Mom's whisper held more steel than silk. "Probably reporting back to Brenda." I stood up, smoothing my black dress. "Excuse me." I intercepted Megan before she could find a seat. "This is a private service." "Oh, please." She flicked her perfectly manicured hands. I'm here to support my brother. You know, your husband. The one you sent away. The one who chose not to come. He's dealing with Mother. She's very upset about how you spoke to her. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to draw stares. Brenda's upset. My father is dead, and she couldn't even show basic human decency. You've never understood our family dynamic. Your family dynamic. The words tasted bitter. I've spent 5 years trying to fit into your twisted little world. Bending over backward to please Brenda. Supporting Mark's every decision, even when those decisions were actually your mother's. Megan's face flushed. Mother only wants what's best. For whom? Because it's never been for me, or even for Mark. It's always been about control. She stepped closer, dropping her voice. You should be careful, Camille. Things are changing. Mother and Mark have been talking, and what? The pieces clicked together, Mark's recent late nights, his secretive phone calls, the way he'd been avoiding my eyes. Megan's smile turned cruel. Let's just say you might want to start thinking about your future. Your real future. Without us. As she sashayed away, I caught my reflection in the funeral home's brass fixtures. I barely recognized myself, this woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. But I liked her. She looked ready for war. I returned to my seat, my mother's questioning glance following me. Everything okay? No, I said, watching Megan text furiously on her phone. But it will be. 3 days after the funeral, I found the divorce papers on our kitchen table. They sat there like a loaded gun, Mark's signature already dried on the dotted line. The morning light caught the gold of his wedding band, carelessly placed on top of them. My coffee mug shattered against the floor before I realized I'd dropped it. I was going to tell you. Mark's voice came from behind me. He'd been waiting, watching me find them. After things settled down with your father. How considerate of you. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. When did you sign these? Last week. Mother's lawyer drew them up. Of course he did. I picked up his wedding band, its weight suddenly insignificant. Let me guess, Brenda helped you pick the timing too. He stepped forward, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. It's not like that. Mother just thinks. Stop. The word cut through the air. Just stop saying, Mother thinks. For once in your life, Mark, what do you think? His silence was deafening. I moved to the coffee maker, methodically cleaning up the spilled coffee, picking up ceramic shards. Each movement felt deliberate, controlled, while my mind raced through 5 years of marriage, cataloging every moment Brenda had orchestrated. Every time Mark had deferred to her judgment. There's something else, he said quietly. Of course there was. There's always something else with the Johnsons. Mother's lawyer suggested we revisit the prenup. Given your father's estate. The ceramic shard bit into my palm. Blood welled up, bright and shocking against my skin. You want my inheritance. Not me. Mother thinks. Get out. Camille. I said get out. I hurled his wedding band at him. It bounced off his chest, rolling under the refrigerator. Run back to Mommy. Tell her she finally won. He hesitated, then reached for his keys. I'll come back for my things later. Don't bother. I'll have them delivered to Brenda's house. Properly itemized, photographed, and documented by my lawyer. His eyes widened. Your lawyer. I smiled, feeling something cold and calculating settle into my bones. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the late-night calls? The secret meetings? I've had my own lawyer for months, Mark. And unlike Brenda's, Mine specializes in exposing financial manipulation in divorces. The color drained from his face. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Your mother just made the biggest mistake of her life. She came after my father's legacy. He fled, the door slamming behind him. I looked down at my bleeding palm, at the divorce papers on the table, at the empty space where my wedding photo used to hang. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. Sometimes it burns everything to the ground. The storage unit door rattled open, revealing cardboard boxes labeled in my father's precise handwriting. Each one contained evidence of financial transactions, property deeds, and correspondence spanning 20 years. Dad had always been methodical, but this was different. This was preparation. My phone buzzed, another message from Brenda. I ignored it, just like I'd ignored the previous 12. Instead, I pulled out a box marked Johnson Family, 2019, and began reading. The documents inside made my blood run cold. I thought I'd find you here. My mother's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups. You're reading them, aren't you? Did you know? I held up a stack of papers. About Brenda trying to buy out Dad's company 3 years ago. About the shell corporations she set up. Mom's silence was answer enough. She settled beside me on an old chair. Your father protected us from more than just bad business deals, honey. I shuffled through more papers, each revelation worse than the last. She tried to force a merger. Threatened him with fabricated evidence of fraud. My hands shook. All while smiling at family dinners, playing the perfect mother-in-law. Your father knew what would happen when he died. Mom touched a box gently. He knew they'd come after his legacy. After you. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Mark, Mother's lawyer needs to meet. It's important. They're getting desperate, I said, showing Mom the message. They thought I'd be too grief-stricken to fight back. That I'd just hand everything over. Like mother, like son. Mom's voice held an edge I'd never heard before. Mark knew about all of this, Camille. He was at those meetings with Brenda. Your father kept records. The betrayal hit differently this time, not a sharp pain, but a cold, clarifying anger. I thought of every night Mark came home late, claiming work kept him at the office. Every time he defended his mother's business acumen. There's something else. Mom pulled out an envelope from her purse. Your father left this for you. Said to give it to you only if things went this way. Inside was a single USB drive and a note, the best defense is a good offense. Love, Dad. I plugged it into my phone. Files appeared, hundreds of them. Emails. Financial records. Recorded conversations. Everything needed to destroy Brenda Johnson's carefully constructed empire. Dad knew, I whispered. He knew and he gave me the weapons to fight back. Mom squeezed my hand. The question is, are you ready to use them? I looked at my phone as another message from Brenda appeared, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Oh, mother dear, I said, starting to smile. I'm going to make this impossible. My father's study remained untouched since his death, his reading glasses still perched on a stack of financial reports. I sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the evidence he'd collected, preparing for the meeting that would change everything. The doorbell rang. Are you sure about this? Mom asked from the doorway, her face tight with concern. They're coming whether we want them to or not. I checked my watch. Brenda insisted on neutral ground. What's more neutral than the house where she tried to destroy Dad's legacy? Mom's lips thinned. I'll send them in. Moments later, Brenda swept into the study like she owned it, Megan trailing behind her like an eager shadow. Mark entered last, refusing to meet my eyes. Really, Camille, Brenda said, eyeing the room with distaste. All this drama for a simple negotiation. I gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. We have a lot to discuss. Indeed. Brenda pulled out a thick folder. Our lawyer has prepared a very generous. Before we start, I interrupted, I'd like to play something. I pressed play on my laptop. The room filled with Brenda's voice from 3 years ago, threatening my father with fabricated evidence. The color drained from Mark's face. Megan's perfectly manicured nails dug into her armrest. Where did you get that? Brenda's voice had lost its smoothness. Dad kept everything. I spread out documents across the desk. Every meeting, every threat, every attempt to force him out of his own company. Even the offshore accounts you set up to hide the money you embezzled from your investors. You're bluffing. But Brenda's hands shook as she reached for the papers. Mark knew, I said softly, watching my husband flinch. He knew everything, didn't he? That's why you kept him close, made sure he never stood up to you. Because he was complicit. Mother, Mark started, but Brenda silenced him with a look. What do you want? She demanded. I leaned back in my father's chair, feeling his strength flow through me. I want you to understand something. This isn't a negotiation. This is me telling you how things will be. You wouldn't dare expose. Try me. I stood up, my voice steady. You have 24 hours to transfer control of all company assets back to their rightful owners. After that, these files go to the SEC. You'll destroy Mark too, Megan blurted. Mark destroyed himself. I met his eyes finally, seeing the weak man I'd been too in love to recognize before. He chose his side long ago. Brenda stood, her composure cracking. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I smiled, channeling her own cold efficiency. The clock's ticking, mother dear. Tick. Tock. They left in silence, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. Mom appeared with 2 glasses of Dad's favorite whiskey. He would be proud, she said, handing me one. I touched the glass to his photo on the desk. This is just the beginning. The deadline passed without a word from Brenda. I sat in my lawyer's office, watching the clock tick past midnight, when my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A video link. My hands trembled as I pressed play. There was my father, 3 months before his death, meeting with Mark in a dimly lit restaurant. Their voices came through clearly. You have to help me stop her, Mark. Your mother's going to destroy everything I've built. I know, Mark replied. That's the plan. The video continued, showing more meetings, more betrayals. My father begging his son-in-law to choose the right path. Mark promising to help, all while feeding information back to Brenda. This arrived an hour ago, my lawyer said, sliding a document across the desk. They're countersuing for defamation. And there's more. More papers. More revelations. My father hadn't just been fighting Brenda, he'd been fighting cancer, keeping it secret while trying to protect his legacy. The stress of Mark's betrayal had accelerated his decline. My phone buzzed again. Brenda, check the news. The headline hit like a physical blow. Walker Industries CEO's death linked to financial irregularities, family members question legacy. They'd beaten me to the punch, spinning their own narrative. My father, the supposed fraudster. Me, the vengeful daughter trying to frame innocent people. They've been planning this for months, my lawyer said quietly. The PR campaign, the false witnesses, everything. They're trying to destroy your father's reputation before you can expose them. My phone kept lighting up with messages from former colleagues, business partners, even old friends. All asking the same question, was it true? What do we do? I asked, my voice hollow. We could fight it, but, he hesitated. They've got Mark's testimony. Your father's medical records showing his mental state near the end. It would be your word against a grieving widow's. The irony burned. I'd thought I was the one setting the trap, but I'd walked right into theirs. A final message from Brenda appeared, "Come home, darling. We can still be family if you just accept things as they are." I stood up, walking to the window. The city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. Somewhere out there, Brenda was celebrating her victory, Mark was probably drowning his guilt in expensive whiskey. And Megan was gleefully watching my world burn. "No," I said finally. "No." I turned back to my lawyer, feeling something cold and certain settle in my chest. My father didn't raise me to surrender. If they want a war, let's give them one they'll never forget. It could cost you everything. They already took everything. I picked up my father's USB drive. Now it's my turn to take it back. The annual Johnson Family Charity Gala buzzed with nervous energy as I walked through the doors. Brenda stood at the podium, basking in applause after announcing her latest philanthropic venture, funded, no doubt, with my father's stolen money. Our eyes met across the room. Her smile faltered. "You weren't invited," Megan hissed, appearing at my elbow in designer silk. Actually, I was. I held up my phone, displaying the email from the board of directors. As the new majority shareholder of Walker Industries, I have a few announcements to make. The color drained from her face. "That's impossible." Mother made sure. Made sure what? That all the shares were transferred before my father's death. I smiled. She should have checked the dates more carefully. Brenda was already moving through the crowd, Mark trailing behind her like a lost puppy. But I was faster, reaching the podium first. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I'd like to share some interesting financial documents with you." "Security." Brenda called out, but no one moved. "Your security team works for the board now," I said quietly. "And the board works for me." The projector screen behind me flickered to life, displaying transaction records, offshore accounts, and damning emails. 5 years of systematic theft and manipulation, laid bare for all their society friends to see. "You'll destroy everything," Mark pleaded. "No, you did that." I turned to the crowd. The Johnson Family Foundation isn't a charity, it's a front for embezzlement. And I can prove it. Brenda lunged for the podium, but stopped short when camera flashes erupted. Reporters, carefully invited, captured every moment of her undoing. "This is how it feels," I said softly, for her ears only. "To watch everything you built crumble. The difference is, my father built something real. You built a house of lies." "I'll fight this," she snarled. "With what money?" "The SEC has frozen all your accounts." I glanced at my watch. "They're probably searching your offices right now." Megan grabbed Mark's arm. "Do something." But Mark just stood there, finally breaking under the weight of his own cowardice. "I can't." "The board has voted," I continued, addressing the shocked crowd. "The Johnson Family Foundation is being dissolved. All assets will be returned to their rightful owners." As security finally moved in, not to remove me, but to escort Brenda and her children out, I caught a glimpse of my mother in the crowd. She nodded once, pride shining in her eyes. "One more thing," I called after Brenda's retreating back. "Dad wanted you to know, he forgives you." "I don't." The doors closed behind them with a final, satisfying click. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just serving justice, it's serving it in front of everyone who matters. The morning newspaper sat untouched on my father's desk, its headline stark against the white paper. Johnson Family Foundation executives face federal charges. Beside it lay the final divorce papers, Mark's signature a weak scrawl at the bottom. My phone buzzed, another desperate message from Megan. I deleted it without reading, just like the others. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, my assistant reminded me. I straightened my father's nameplate, now bearing my name beneath his. The weight of his legacy felt different now, not a burden, but a foundation. The boardroom hummed with anticipation as I entered. These were my father's people, now mine, their loyalty earned through actions rather than manipulation. The agenda was simple: restructuring the company's charitable giving, undoing years of Brenda's corruption. Before we begin, I said, I'd like to announce a new initiative. I laid out the plans for the Walker Foundation, not a vanity project like Brenda's had been, but a genuine attempt to help families torn apart by financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mark stood there, looking smaller somehow in his expensive suit. The security team can escort you out, I offered. Please, he said. Just 2 minutes. I followed him to the hallway, maintaining a careful distance. He pulled out an envelope. Mother wanted me to give you this. He held it out like a peace offering. She wrote it before they took her in. I didn't take it. Some things can't be fixed with words, Mark. I know. He set the envelope on a nearby table. I just thought you should have the choice to read it or not. Like the choice I never gave you. He turned to leave, then paused. You were right, you know. About everything. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to see it sooner. I watched him walk away, the envelope untouched between us. Through the window, I could see my mother in the garden below, tending to the roses my father had planted. She looked up, waved, her smile carrying all the strength I'd needed to get here. Back in the boardroom, my team waited with their proposals and plans. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with revenge or justice, just growth and healing. The envelope remained in the hallway, Brenda's last attempt at control. Maybe someday I'd read it. Maybe I wouldn't. The power was in knowing the choice was mine. I opened the meeting with my father's favorite phrase, let's build something that matters. This time, when I said it, I knew exactly what that meant.